The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky surface of planet Kithara as Captain Jake Morrison sipped his coffee inside the UES Liberty. The ship sat quietly in a small valley, its metal hull reflecting the orange light. Jake looked out the window at the strange landscape. Purple rocks jutted up from the ground like giant teeth, and in the distance, floating islands hung in the air like pieces of a broken puzzle. "Another boring day of rock collecting," muttered Lieutenant Amy Carter from her seat at the science station. She pushed a strand of brown hair out of her eyes and stared at the computer screen showing mineral readings. 3 weeks on this planet, and all we've found are some pretty crystals. Sergeant Tony Blake laughed from where he sat cleaning his rifle. Better boring than getting shot at by angry aliens. He was a big man with kind eyes and hands that never stopped moving. "Remember what happened on Proxima Station?" Jake smiled. Tony was right. After 6 months of dangerous missions, a quiet survey job felt good. The Liberty was a small exploration ship with a crew of 5. They traveled to new planets, looking for useful minerals and making sure they were safe for other humans to visit. Later, Captain called Engineer Lisa Park from the back of the ship. "I'm getting something weird on the communication array." Lisa was young but smart, the kind of person who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. "It's not coming from Earth or any human ship." Jake set down his coffee cup. "What kind of signal?" "It's weak, but it's definitely artificial. And Captain ... I think it's trying to talk to us." Medic Greg Stone looked up from his medical supplies. Greg was quiet most of the time, but he noticed everything. "Could be a trap," he said softly. "Pirates sometimes use fake distress calls." Jake walked over to Lisa's station. The communication equipment beeped and crackled with static. Through the noise, he could hear something that sounded like a voice. "Can you clean it up?" Jake asked. Lisa's fingers danced over the controls. Slowly, the static faded. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in broken but understandable standard language. It was clearly not human. The accent was strange, and some of the words were wrong. But the emotion in the voice was something any human could understand. Fear. "Please. Anyone ... help." The voice was female and high-pitched. "My family ... they are trapped. I do not know what to do ... The crew gathered around the communication station. Amy leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. "The vocal patterns suggest a humanoid species, but smaller. Lung capacity, probably about 4 feet tall." The voice continued, sometimes clear and sometimes lost in static. "I hear humans are brave. Humans help others. Please, if any human can hear this. My family is trapped in the sky beast's nest ... I cannot reach them. Time is running out." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. The desperation in the voice was real. No one could fake that kind of pain. "Can we trace the signal?" He asked Lisa. "Already on it, Captain. It's coming from about 50 kilometers north of here. There's a settlement in that direction. Our scans showed it 3 days ago." Tony stood up and walked to the window. "Sky beast? What the hell is a sky beast?" Greg joined him at the window and pointed up at the floating islands. "Maybe something that lives up there? Those rocks have been floating since we arrived. I assumed it was some kind of magnetic field, but what if something is keeping them up there?" Amy finished. She was already pulling up data on her computer. "I've been studying those formations. They're not natural. The rocks are held in place by some kind of biological electromagnetic field." The voice came through the speakers again, clearer this time. "Please ... my children ... my mother. They have been there for 3 days. The sky beast feeds its young soon. I cannot fly ... people cannot fly. But I hear humans can do anything." Jake looked at his crew. He saw the same expression on each face that he felt in his heart. They were explorers, scientists, and soldiers, but first and foremost, they were human. And humans did not ignore cries for help. Lisa prepped the shuttle. Tony, get your gear ready. Amy, I want everything you can find about electromagnetic fields and flying predators. Captain, Greg said quietly, we don't know anything about this species or this planet's dangers. This could be extremely risky. Jake nodded. You're right, it could be. But someone is asking for help, and they specifically asked for humans. Because they believe we can do the impossible. He paused and looked at each of his crew members. Are they wrong? Tony grinned and started checking his weapons. Never met an impossible problem I couldn't solve with enough explosives. Amy was already deep in her research. The electromagnetic readings from those floating rocks are fascinating. If a creature can generate fields that strong, Lisa was. Running system checks on the shuttle. We'll need atmospheric suits if we're going up there. The air pressure will be different at that altitude. Greg sighed and started packing his medical kit. Well, if we're going to do something crazy, at least let me make sure I can patch everyone up afterward. The voice came through the speakers. One more time, weaker now. My name is Zira. I am of the Villani people. If anyone can hear this ... please help us. We have nothing to offer but our gratitude and our hope that humans are truly as brave as the stories say. Jake walked to the communication station and pressed the transmit button. Zira, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human ship Liberty. We hear you, and we're coming to help. Can you meet us halfway between our positions? For a long moment, there was only static. Then, a sob of relief came through the speakers. You ... you are real? You will help? We're human, Jake said simply. Of course we'll help. 20 minutes later, the crew of the Liberty was suited up and walking across the purple landscape toward their first meeting with an alien in need. None of them knew what they were walking into, but they all knew one thing for certain. They would not let Zira down. That was what humans did. Zira was waiting for them at the meeting point, exactly where she said she would be. Jake had seen pictures of many alien species in his training, but meeting one in person was different. She stood about 4 feet tall, with blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Her large, dark eyes were red from crying, and her small hands shook as she approached the humans. You came, she whispered, looking up at Jake. You really came. We said we would, Jake replied gently. He knelt down, so he was closer to her height. Tell us about your family. Zira's voice broke as she spoke. My children, Hyo and Neela, they are only younglings. And my mother, Elder Myra, she is too old for this. She stopped and took a shaky breath. 3 days ago, the sky beast came to our village. It took them while they were gathering fruits. In the high orchards, Amy stepped forward with her scanner. May I? She asked, gesturing to the device. Zira nodded, though she looked nervous. The scanner won't hurt, Amy explained as she took readings. I'm trying to understand your biology so we can help better. The device beeped quietly as it worked. Fascinating. Your bone structure is much lighter than human bones, but your muscle density is incredible for your size. Tony was studying the floating islands above them through his binoculars. Those things are huge. How high up are they? The lowest nest is at 5,000 meters, Zira said. The main nest where my family is held is at nearly 5,000 meters higher. No Villani has ever been that high and survived. Greg whistled. That's almost 16,000 feet. The air will be thin up there. Lisa was running scans with her. Equipment. Captain, the electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever is keeping those rocks in the air is incredibly powerful. Zira nodded sadly. The sky beasts are ancient creatures. They have ruled our skies since before my people learned to speak. We always avoided them, and they mostly ignored us. But this one, has grown desperate. It's young or hungry. How big are these sky beasts? Jake asked. As long as your ship, Zira replied. Maybe longer. They have great wings that shimmer like crystal, and their bodies glow with the same power that holds the rocks in the air. When they fly, the very air around them crackles with energy. Amy was taking notes rapidly. Bioelectromagnetic creatures. They must have specialized organs that generate massive electrical fields, the energy requirements alone. Can they be reasoned with? Greg asked. Are they intelligent? Zira shook her head. They are smart like a predator is smart. They know how to hunt, how to keep their food alive for their young. But they do not speak or think like we do. To them, we are just meat. The group was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Finally, Tony spoke up. So we've got giant, flying electric whales living in floating rocks 5 miles up in thin air, and they've got hostages they're saving for dinner. That's about the size of it, Jake said grimly. Sounds like a Tuesday to me. Tony grinned, which made Zira look confused. Lisa was studying her readings. Captain, this is going to be a problem. The electromagnetic fields around those rocks would fry most of our equipment. Our suits, our weapons, our communication gear, none of it would work up there. What about shielding? Amy asked. We'd need materials we don't have. And even if we could shield our equipment, we still have the problem of getting up there. Our shuttle wasn't designed for that kind of altitude on an alien world. Zira looked between the humans, hope and despair warring in her expression. You cannot help them? Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The rest of his crew watched him, waiting. They had followed him through dangerous situations before, and they trusted his judgment. But this seemed impossible, even by human standards. We need more information, Jake said finally. Zira, can you take us to your village? We need to talk to your people, learn everything we can about these sky beasts. Zira's face lit up with hope. Yes, Elder Kyrian knows much about the old stories, and Healer Vex has studied the beasts for many years. The walk to the Vellani village took an hour. Jake was impressed by how well organized it was. Small, rounded. Buildings made from the local purple stone were arranged in neat circles around a central gathering place. Gardens of strange plants grew between the buildings, and streams of clean water flowed through carefully designed channels. The Vellani people came out to stare at the humans as they passed. Most were about Zira's size, with skin that ranged from pale blue to deep purple. Their large eyes showed curiosity and wonder, but also fear. These were people who had lived with the threat of sky beasts their entire lives. Elder Kyrian was ancient even by Vellani standards. His skin was so pale it was almost white, and he moved slowly with the help of a walking stick. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent. So, he said in heavily accented standard, the humans have come to attempt the impossible. We haven't decided what we're attempting yet, Jake replied. We need to understand what we're dealing with first. Kyrian nodded approvingly. Wise, come, sit. I will tell you what my people know of the sky beasts. They gathered in the central meeting area as more Vellani joined them. Kyrian's voice was strong despite his age as he began to speak. Long ago, when my grandfather's grandfather was young, the sky beasts were few. They nested in the highest mountains and rarely came down to where we lived. But the mountains began to crumble, and the beasts learned to lift rocks with their power, making new homes in the sky. Amy leaned forward. How long have they been doing this? Perhaps 200 years, Kyrian replied. At first, they only took our livestock. Then they began taking people, but only occasionally. This beast, though, it is different, desperate. It has taken more in the last month than we usually lose in a year. Healer Vex, A middle-aged Vellani with intricate tattoos covering her arms spoke up. I have studied their behavior from afar. They keep their prey alive in crystal pods that preserve life but keep the victim unconscious. The young beasts feed, slowly, taking small amounts over time. How long do the victims survive? Greg asked. If they are strong, perhaps 2 weeks. But Elder Myra is not young. And the children? Vex's voice trailed off. Tony stood up and began pacing. Okay, so we have maybe a week before this becomes a recovery mission instead of a rescue. What do we know about their weaknesses? Kyrian smiled grimly. Weaknesses? The sky beasts have ruled our world for generations. If they had weaknesses, do you not think we would have found them? Maybe, Jake said quietly, but you're not human. The old Vellani studied Jake's face for a long moment. You truly believe you can do this impossible thing? Jake looked around at his crew. Tony was already sketching plans on his tablet. Amy was deep in conversation with Vex about sky beast biology. Lisa was running calculations on her computer while Greg studied maps of the area. I don't know if we can do it, Jake said honestly, but I know we're going to try. Because that's what humans do when someone asks for help. Kyrian nodded slowly. Then perhaps the old stories are true. Perhaps humans really are the ones who make the impossible possible. As the sun began to set over the strange landscape of Kithara, the humans and Vellani worked together, sharing knowledge and planning what might be the most dangerous mission any of them had ever attempted. High above them, the floating islands drifted silently through the sky, holding their terrible secrets. The next morning found the crew of the Liberty working in ways they had never worked before. Jake stood in the ship's cargo bay, which had been transformed overnight into a makeshift workshop. Tools and spare parts were scattered everywhere, and the air smelled of metal and determination. This is completely insane, Lisa muttered as she welded 2 pieces of mining equipment together. Sparks flew from her torch, lighting up her concentrated face. We're trying to turn rock drills into rocket packs. Insane is what humans do best, Tony replied from where he was modifying atmospheric suits. He had stripped the heavy outer plating and was replacing it with lighter materials scavenged from the ship's interior. Besides, you're the one who figured out how to make it work. Lisa had spent most of the night running calculations and simulations. The mining equipment they carried was powerful, designed to break through the toughest planetary surfaces. But with some creative engineering, that same power could be redirected to provide thrust. The theory is sound, Amy said from her corner of the bay. She was mixing chemicals in small vials, creating what she hoped would be their secret weapon. If Lisa's thrust calculations are correct, and if my pheromone mixture works, and if Tony's suit modifications hold together, and if Greg's medical preparations keep us conscious at that altitude ... That's a lot of ifs, Greg observed. He was preparing oxygen supplies and altitude medication, drawing on his medical training to help humans survive in conditions they were never meant to experience. Welcome to being human, Jake said with a grin. We specialize in making impossible things work through sheer stubbornness and creative use of explosives. Zira watched them work with wide eyes. She had insisted on staying to help, despite the danger. I do not understand how you can be so calm, she said to Jake. You are planning to fly higher than any of my people have ever gone, to face a creature that has terrorized us for generations. Jake paused in his work on the electromagnetic shielding, a combination of ship's hull plating and local minerals that the Vellani had shown them. We're not calm, he said. We're scared too, but being scared doesn't mean we give up. It means we work harder to find a solution. But what if you fail? Then we fail trying, Tony said without looking up from his suit modifications. But we don't fail by not trying. Amy had been studying sky beast biology with Healer Vex all night. I think I understand how their electromagnetic fields work, she announced. They generate a complex pattern of electrical pulses that interact with the iron content in the floating rocks. If I can create a pheromone mixture that mimics their territorial markers, it should confuse their sensory organs. Should? Lisa asked. Will? Amy corrected firmly. It will work because we need it to work. The plan they had developed was typically human in its complexity and audacity. They would approach the floating islands at dawn, when the sky beast would be least active, using Lisa's modified mining equipment as propulsion systems. 2-team members would fly up to the nest, while the others created a distraction. The distraction was Tony's contribution to the plan. We're going to use controlled explosions to destabilize some of the smaller floating rocks, he explained to Zira. Not enough to bring them down, but enough to make the sky beast think its territory is under attack. While it's focused on protecting its nest, we slip in and grab the hostages. You want to make it angry? Zira asked, her voice rising in pitch. Angry and distracted, Jake corrected. There's a difference. Greg had prepared medical supplies for high-altitude rescue. The atmospheric pressure up there will be about half what we're used to. The medications I've prepared will help, but we'll still be operating on borrowed time. Lisa finished her welding and stepped back to admire her work. The mining drill now looked like something from a fever dream, part industrial equipment, part spacecraft engine. The thrust-to-weight ratio should be just enough to get us up there. Getting down might be more of a controlled fall. That's what parachutes are for, Tony said, patting a pack of emergency chutes they had modified. Amy held up a small spray bottle filled with purple liquid. This is our secret weapon. Sky Beast pheromones synthesized from samples Healer Vex provided. One spray of this should convince any Sky Beast that we belong in their territory. Should, Lisa repeated. Will, Amy said again, more firmly this time. As the day progressed, more Velani arrived to watch the humans work. Elder Kyrian came with a group of village leaders, all wanting to see the impossible thing the humans were attempting. In all our history, Kyrian said to Jake, no one has ever tried to rescue someone from a Sky Beast's nest. We always accepted it as the will of fate. Humans don't accept fate very well, Jake replied. We prefer to argue with it until it changes its mind. By afternoon, their equipment was ready. The modified suits looked like armor from a science fiction movie, complete with propulsion systems and electromagnetic shielding. The weapons Tony had prepared were a mix of human technology and Valani knowledge tools, designed to work in an environment that would disable most equipment. Final systems check, Jake announced. The crew gathered around their improvised equipment, running through their checklist one more time. Propulsion systems? Green, Lisa reported. Life support? Green, Greg confirmed. Weapons and distractions? Very green, Tony said with a grin that made Zira nervous. Biological countermeasures? Ready, Amy nodded. Communications? We'll have short range only once we're in the electromagnetic field, Lisa warned. But it should be enough for coordination. Jake looked at his crew. They had worked together for 2 years, but this mission would test them in ways they had never been tested before. Anyone want to back out? This is your last chance to be sensible. Sensible is boring, Tony replied. I've always wanted to study bioelectromagnetic creatures up close, Amy added. Someone has to keep you all alive, Greg said with a shrug. And someone has to make sure the equipment works, Lisa finished. Zira stepped forward. I want to come with you? Absolutely not, Jake said immediately. It is my family up there. I should be the one to take the risk. You'll be taking a risk by helping us navigate once we're up there, Jake explained gently. We need someone on the ground who knows Sky Beast behavior and can guide us through the communication system. As the sun began to set, they moved their equipment to a launch site closer to the floating islands. The sky beast's nest loomed above them like a dark cloud, occasionally lit by flashes of the creature's bioelectrical field. "Tomorrow morning," Jake said, looking up at their target, "we're going to do something that has never been done before. Think it will work?" Lisa asked. Jake smiled. "It's a plan made by humans to help someone in need. Of course it will work." High above them, unaware of the storm of human determination gathering below, the sky beast settled in for the night. In crystal pods throughout its nest, Zira's family waited for a rescue they could never have imagined was coming. The humans had a saying: "The difficult they do immediately. The impossible just takes a little longer." Tomorrow, they would prove it. Dawn came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Jake stood at the edge of the launch site, wearing his modified atmospheric suit and feeling the weight of the improvised propulsion system on his back. The sky above was clear, and the floating islands hung in the air like sleeping giants. "Final equipment check," he said into his helmet microphone. His voice crackled through the short-range communication system Lisa had cobbled together. "Systems green," came Tony's voice. The big sergeant looked strange in his modified suit, like a medieval knight wearing a jetpack, ready to go kick some sky beast tail. "Remember," Amy's voice came through from the ground station, "a pheromone spray only works if you get close enough to use it. And once you're inside the nest, the creature's own scent will mask your presence, but only for a limited time." Greg was making final adjustments to their medical supplies. "Oxygen levels will drop fast once you reach altitude. You have maybe 30 minutes of peak performance before the thin air starts affecting your judgment." Lisa's voice crackled through the radio. "Propulsion systems are showing optimal pressure. Remember, short bursts only. These things weren't designed for sustained flight." Down in the Velani village, Zira was coordinating with Elder Kyrian and the other villagers. They had positioned themselves with mirrors and lights to signal the floating islands' positions as they drifted slowly through the sky. "Sky Beast is still inactive," Zira reported, "but the morning thermal currents will wake it soon. You must go now." Jake looked at Tony. "Ready, old friend?" "Been ready since yesterday," Tony grinned. "Let's go get those people." Jake activated his propulsion system. The modified mining drill roared to life, sending him shooting up into the sky faster than he had expected. The ground fell away below him with alarming speed, and he had to fight to control his trajectory. "Holy hell," he muttered into his microphone. "Lisa, these things have more kick than you calculated." "Sorry, Captain." Lisa's voice came through, slightly distorted by distance. "I may have been conservative with the safety margins." Tony was keeping pace beside him, his suit systems working smoothly. "Conservative? I feel like a rocket with a human attached." As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. Jake could feel the atmospheric suit working harder to maintain pressure and temperature. Below them, the Velani village looked like a collection of toys, and the Liberty appeared to be the size of his thumb. 2,000 meters and climbing. Greg's voice came through the radio. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm flying through a dream," Jake replied. The sensation was incredible. Humans were never meant to fly under their own power. But here they were, soaring through an alien sky toward an impossible rescue dot at 3,000 meters. They encountered their first real challenge. The electromagnetic field from the floating islands began to interfere with their equipment. Jake's heads-up display flickered and went dead, leaving him to navigate by sight alone. "Lost my HUD," he reported. "Same here," Tony confirmed. "Good thing humans are adaptable." They could see the sky beast now. It was enormous, easily as long as their ship, with crystalline wings that caught and reflected the morning sunlight. Its body pulsed with blue-white electrical energy, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with power. "It's beautiful," Jake whispered, then immediately felt foolish for admitting it. "Beautiful and deadly," Tony replied. "The best kind." The creature was circling its nest lazily, apparently unaware of the two humans approaching from below. The nest itself was a nightmare of crystalline formations and floating rock, held together by the beast's electromagnetic field. Jake could see dozens of crystal pods embedded in the structure, each one glowing softly with preserved life. "There are a lot more prisoners than we expected," he said into his radio. Amy's voice crackled through the interference. "The creature has been collecting for longer than the Vellani realized. Some of those pods might contain beings from other species. Then we save them all," Jake said simply. "Tony, you see an entry point?" Tony was studying the nest through his suit's limited optics. "Bottom level, about 2 o'clock from our position. Looks like a natural opening between the rock formations." They adjusted their flight path, using careful bursts from their propulsion systems. The electromagnetic interference was getting stronger, and Jake could feel his suit's systems struggling to compensate. Now would be a good time for that distraction, he said into his radio. Lisa's voice came through, barely audible through the static. "Initiating controlled detonations in 3.2.1. A series of explosions bloomed around the smaller floating islands about a kilometer away. The sky beast's head snapped up immediately, its crystalline wings flaring wide as it sensed a threat to its territory. "It's working," Tony said. "The big ugly is moving away from the nest." The sky beast let out a sound that was part roar, part electronic screech. It launched itself toward the explosions, its massive body crackling with electrical energy as it flew. "Go, go, go," Jake urged, diving toward the opening Tony had spotted. They reached the nest's entrance, just as Jake's propulsion system gave out with a mechanical wheeze. He crash-landed on a crystal platform, rolling to absorb the impact. Tony touched down more gracefully, his military training showing. "Systems failure," Jake reported, checking his equipment. "We're walking out of here." "That was always the plan," Tony replied, shouldering his pack. "The fun part starts now." Inside the nest, the air hummed with electrical energy. Crystal formations grew from every surface, some containing the glowing pods they had seen from outside. The pods were transparent, and Jake could see the sleeping forms inside. Not just Vellani, but creatures he didn't recognize. Amy was right. He said, "This thing has been collecting for a long time." They moved deeper into the nest, following a path between the crystal formations. Jake's suit radiation detector was clicking steadily, indicating dangerous levels of electromagnetic energy. "Found them," Tony called from ahead. In a cluster of pods near the center of the nest, they could see 3 Vellani, 2 small forms that had to be the children, and an elderly female who must be Zira's mother. Jake began working on the first pod with the tools they had brought. The crystal was harder than diamond, but the plasma cutter Lisa had modified was slowly making progress. "How many others can we carry?" he asked, looking around at the dozens of other pods. "In these suits, with this gravity and atmosphere?" Tony was already calculating. "Maybe 6, if we're lucky, and they're all small." The first pod cracked open with a sound like breaking glass. Inside, one of Zira's children, a small Vellani with bright blue skin, stirred and opened large, confused eyes. "It's okay," Jake said, gently lifting the child from the pod. "We're here to take you home." The child was weak from the preservation process, but alive and alert. Jake passed the small form to Tony and began working on the second pod. That's when they heard it a roar that seemed to shake the entire nest. The sky beast had realized the explosions were a distraction. It was coming back. Captain," Tony said, looking toward the entrance. "We might want to hurry." Jake's plasma cutter was working on the elderly Vellani's pod. Almost got her. Start working on some of the others." They worked frantically as the sound of the sky beast's approach grew. Louder. Crystal formations throughout the nest began to glow brighter, responding to the creature's emotional state. "Got one," Tony called, lifting a small reptilian creature from its pod. "Never seen this species before." Jake freed Zira's mother, who was unconscious but breathing. "3 down. How many more can we manage?" The nest suddenly shook as the sky beast landed outside. Its electromagnetic field surged, and half of their remaining equipment died. "That's our cue to leave," Tony said, gathering up the 2 alien children. They had freed Jake, shouldered the unconscious elderly Vellani, and grabbed 2 more of the smaller prisoners. "The emergency chutes better work, because our ride just died." They made their way toward what they hoped was another exit, moving as quickly as they could while carrying their rescued prisoners. Behind them, they could hear the sky beast moving through its nest, searching for the intruders. "There," Tony pointed to an opening that led to the outside of the nest. "Hope you're not afraid of heights, Captain." Jake looked out at the 5,000-meter drop to the ground below. "Afraid? I'm terrified. Let's do it anyway." That was what it meant to be human, to be scared and do the impossible thing anyway. They stepped out into the sky, carrying their rescued prisoners, trusting in human engineering and sheer determination to get them safely to the ground. The sky beast's roar of fury followed them down, falling through 5 kilometers of alien sky while carrying unconscious prisoners was not something they taught in human military academies. Jake fought to control his descent as the emergency parachute deployed above him, the elderly Vellani. Woman secured to his chest, and a small reptilian being tucked under his arm. "Tony, you still with me?" He called into his radio, though he wasn't sure if it was working anymore. "Right here, Captain," came Tony's voice, surprisingly clear. "Though I think our big friend is a little upset with us." The sky beast was indeed upset. It had launched itself from the nest and was diving toward them, its crystalline wings folded back for maximum speed. Electrical energy crackled around its massive body as it closed the distance between them. "Lisa, now would be a really good time for Phase 2 of the plan," Jake said into his radio. From the ground, Lisa's voice crackled through the static. "Already on it, Captain. Initiating mining charges around the nest support structures." A series of explosions bloomed around the floating islands that supported the sky beast's nest. The blasts were carefully calculated, not enough to destroy the nest and kill the remaining prisoners, but enough to destabilize the magnetic fields holding the rocks in place. The sky beast immediately abandoned its pursuit of the falling humans. Its parental instincts overrode its anger as it saw its nest beginning to tilt dangerously. It spread its wings wide and flew back up, using its electromagnetic field to stabilize the floating rocks. "Brilliant," Jake breathed, watching the creature work frantically to save its home. "It chose its nest over revenge." "That's because it's a parent," Tony replied. "Parents always choose their kids first." They were still falling, but their parachutes were working perfectly. The ground was coming up fast, and Jake could see the Vellani village growing larger below them. Tiny figures were running toward their landing zone, Zira and the other villagers, ready to help Jake hit the ground harder than he would have liked, rolling to protect his passengers. The elderly Vellani woman groaned softly, beginning to wake up from the preservation effects. The small reptilian creature in his arms chirped weakly, but seemed unharmed. Tony landed nearby with similar grace or lack thereof. The 2 Vellani children he carried were starting to stir, their large eyes opening to see strange humans in metal suits. "Are we dead?" one of them asked in a tiny voice. "No, little one," Tony said gently, removing his helmet so they could see his face. "You're safe. We're taking you home." Zira reached them first, running across the rocky ground faster than Jake had thought possible. She dropped to her knees beside her children, tears streaming down her blue face. "Kyo, Neela," she sobbed, gathering them into her arms. "I thought I would never see you again." The children were weak, but alive, clinging to their mother as she held them. "The scary place," little Neela whispered. "The crystal place with the monster." "It's over," Zira whispered back. "The humans came for you. The humans saved you." Elder Kyrian arrived with Healer Vex and several other villagers. They carefully took charge of the rescued prisoners, including Zira's mother, who was beginning to regain consciousness. "My daughter," the elderly Valani whispered, reaching out with a shaking hand. "I'm here, Mother," Zira said, taking her hand. "I'm here, and you're safe." Jake stood up slowly, his body aching from the landing. Amy, Lisa, and Greg were running. Toward them from the communication station they had set up. Above them, the sky beast had managed to stabilize its nest, but the structure looked precarious now. "What about the others?" Amy asked, looking up at the floating islands. There were dozens of prisoners still up there. Jake followed her gaze. The sky beast was circling its damaged nest, clearly agitated, but no longer actively hunting. "We got who we could carry. But you're right, there are others." "The nest is unstable now," Lisa observed, studying the floating rocks through her binoculars. "Those explosions weakened the electromagnetic anchors. It won't hold together much longer." Tony was helping the small reptilian creature they had rescued to drink some water. "Little guy seems friendly. Never seen this species before. There are many species on this world that we have not met," Elder Kyrian said, approaching them. "The sky beasts have been taking travelers and traders for many years. Some of those pods may contain beings from very far away." Jake made a decision that surprised no one who knew him. "Then we go back." "Captain," Greg said carefully, "our equipment is mostly dead. The propulsion systems are gone. How do we get up there?" Jake looked at the sky beast, still circling its unstable nest. Then he looked at the Villani villagers, who were watching him with expressions of hope and amazement. "We don't go up," he said slowly. "We bring the nest down." Lisa's eyes widened. "Captain, that's actually possible. The support structure is already weakened. If we could destabilize the remaining electromagnetic anchors." "The prisoners would be killed in the fall," Amy protested. "Not if we time it right," Tony said, following Jake's thinking. "We wait for the beast to move the pods to safety and bring down the empty nest." "But why would it move the pods?" Greg asked. Jake smiled. "Because we're going to give it a reason to." The plan they hatched over the next hour was typically human, complex, dangerous, and completely insane. They would use the remaining mining charges to threaten the nest's stability, forcing the sky beast to relocate its prisoners to safety. Once the pods were clear, they would bring down the entire structure. "The beast is intelligent enough to protect its food source," Amy explained to the gathered Valani. "If it believes the nest is going to collapse, it will move the pods to one of the lower, more stable islands. And then we can reach them," Zira said, understanding immediately. The humans spent the rest of the day setting up their equipment while the Valani prepared rescue teams. As evening approached, they put their plan into action. Lisa's carefully. Place charges began detonating in sequence around the nest's support points. The sky beast reacted exactly as they had predicted, immediately beginning to move the crystal pods to a lower, more stable island formation. "It's working," Amy breathed, watching through binoculars as the creature carefully transported pod after pod to safety. When the last pod was clear, Jake gave the final order. "Bring it down." The remaining charges detonated simultaneously. The ancient nest, which had floated in the sky for generations, finally succumbed to human determination and explosives. It fell toward the ground in a shower of crystal and stone, the sky beast circling helplessly as its home was destroyed. But the prisoners were safe on the lower island, reachable by the Villani rescue teams that were already climbing toward them. Over the next several days, they recovered 43 beings from a dozen different species. Some had been prisoners for years, others for just days. All of them were alive, and all of them owed their freedom to a simple human principle. No one gets left behind. The sky beast, meanwhile, had retreated to the mountains to build a new nest. Occasionally, the Vellani reported seeing it in the distance, but it no longer hunted near their village. Perhaps it had learned that some prey fought back. On their last night on Kithara, Jake sat with Zira and her family outside their home. The children were playing with some of the other rescued aliens, their laughter carrying across the village. "I have been thinking," Zira said quietly, "about what you told me. About humans not accepting fate. What about it? Before you came, we accepted that some of our people would be taken by the sky beasts. We thought it was just the way things had to be." She paused, watching her children play. "But you showed us that nothing has to be the way it is. Everything can be changed, if you are willing to try." Jake smiled. "That's a dangerous way of thinking." "Yes," Zira agreed. "I think my people are ready to be dangerous." Elder Kyrian approached them, moving slowly but steadily. "Captain Narration," he said formally, "the Vellani Council has decided to name you and your crew Sky Warriors, the first beings in our history to conquer the domain of the sky beasts." "We didn't conquer anything," Jake replied. "We just refused to let them win. Is that not the same thing?" Kyrian asked with a smile dot as the human crew prepared to leave the next morning. The entire Vellani village came to see them off. The rescued aliens had been contacted by their home worlds and would be picked up soon. Zira's family was healthy and whole. "Will we see you again?" Zira asked as Jake prepared to board the Liberty. "Maybe," Jake said. "Humans tend to show up wherever someone needs help." "Good," Zira replied, "because I think we are going to need teachers. We want to learn to be dangerous like humans." As the Liberty lifted off from Kithara, Jake looked back at the planet one last time. In the distance, he could see the Vellani working on some kind of construction project near the floating islands. "Think they'll be okay?" Amy asked, following his gaze. "They'll be fine," Jake said confidently. "They learned the most important human lesson, which is..." Jake smiled as their ship entered hyperspace, carrying them toward their next adventure. "That there's no such thing as impossible, just problems that haven't been solved yet." Behind them, on a small blue planet, the Vellani built their first flying machines and began planning their own rescue missions. They had learned from the humans that the sky belonged to whoever was brave enough to claim it. And in the mountains, a sky beast watched the small flying creatures with what might have been respect. Perhaps it understood that the galaxy had changed. Perhaps it knew that humans had taught others to be human. The age of accepting fate was over. The age of making the impossible possible had begun.